Thank you so much for inviting me to this important event, which is the third OSAN International Future Education Forum. I will speak today to you on the concept, the organization and practice of community learning centers in Germany, with a focus on education for sustainable development and citizenship education. And before I really start, I would like to inform you that I enjoy doing this presentation because of my very good contacts with Korean colleagues for the last almost 4 decades. I remember the first visits to the demilitarized zone and a deep peace discourse which I had with the late Professor Yonggon Hwang. My first visit to the royal tomb of King Sejong, discussing on Hangul and the Korean alphabet with Professor Dr. Kim Shin-il. I came for the consultations on global citizenship education and for the World Education Forum in Incheon and for the Confintea 6 midterm review in Suwon and Osan in 2017. In the same year, I came for the Jeju Lifelong Education Officials International Seminar and the World Forum on Lifelong Learning in Korea, where we visited again Otosan Unification Tower under the leadership by Professor Choi Un-shil. We had exchange visits in 2019 between Korean, Central Asian and German colleagues, and we went to Samarkand. And this year we had the Korean-German International Webinar on Peaceful Unification and the Jeju Forum on Literacy and Peace Education. So maybe this can serve as a reminder why I have a deep interest in Korean community education and why I feel happy that I can do some comparative search with you on the similarities, the commonalities, and the differences in our two systems. A few more biographical notes. I am a student of the 60s and 70s where I did my PhD, and it was the Indochina War, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, which politicized myself. And since 1977, I'm working for DVV International. So I experienced, while I was in DVV, the breakdown of the wall between East and West Germany and the German unification. And to experience a bit deeper in the European scenery, I went to Hungary to be the director in Budapest. And for 5 years, I went to the DVV office, the regional one. We had all my colleagues from Korea, like Professor Kim Shin-il and Choi Un-shil coming. And we all got a clear learning that Laos is still the most heavily bombed country on earth. So maybe with this introduction, you may understand why I'm so deeply concerned that community-based learning is an important component of the human right to lifelong learning. And that I put a strong emphasis on adults, as they are the largest group of society, and we are all adults the longest time in life. Therefore, I agree to the UNESCO use of adult education and learning, the abbreviation ALE, and we see that literacy as a key component of ALE and lifelong learning is what is guiding us in the future. Let me move together with you into some of the historical roots of adult and community education in Germany, which actually started during the time of the Enlightenment. And a lot of what we have in citizenship education today is related to this. It was at the same time part also of the university extension. And at the time, it was actually that it was the slogan, Wissen ist Macht, knowledge is power, which was used, and the agricultural and industrial revolution at the time created the demand for vocational skills for a better employability. And all of this was very close to Grundtvig, who at that time invented what we today call the folk high schools. And these are, in some other languages, the people educational colleges, so adult education centers for learning. The community learning centers in Germany were so important at the time of 1919, when we had the first republic in Germany, the first democracy. And into the constitution, it was written with a single clause, adult education, including the Volkshochschulen, the community learning centers, should be supported at national, provincial, and local level. And therefore, the celebration of 100 years of the community learning centers in Germany was in 2019. And the celebrations were in the St. Paul's Cathedral in Frankfurt. And the president of the Federal Constitutional High Court in Germany was delivering the keynote, placing adult education from a historical perspective into the time of today. At the same time, 2019, we celebrated 50 years of DVV International, which was founded in 1969. The 100 years celebration were used for an awareness campaign. Remember the past and prepare for the future. And maybe you want to look at some of the posters where you see the Medici, and it was raising the issue from the analog to the digital. And you see the slogan below on the VHS on the folk high schools, 100 years of sharing wisdom. And you remember the face of Karl Marx, the great philosopher from Germany, which was used there for all these subject areas of the community learning centers, which are related to society and health. And the Nofetete for culture and vocation. So it was a real motivation campaign, creating access and opportunities for further adult learning and education. The focal schools today, the German adult education centers, are the largest providers in Germany. They have a strong community sponsorship, and there are now more than 900 centers all across Germany with some 3,000 sub-centers so that people have more easy access. They have 600,000 adult education offers, courses, lectures per year, with more than 6 million course participation per year, and more than 3 million participating additionally in lectures, exhibitions, study tours, and excursions. If you look at the relationship to the community, then there is a strong community sponsorship. And the legal entities of the German CLC is that a large share, more than 1/3, are belonging to the municipality and the councils or the counties and the city-states. The others are associations, but regulated from the same policy, legislation, and financing, as we discussed earlier, from the constitutional perspective. Others are companies, but on a non-for-profit level. If you look at gender, then you can see how eager are women for education. As you can see that in all subject areas like politics, society or environment, or culture, or health, or languages, in work and in all areas for the second chance, you see that there are more women than men participating. If we look at the overall picture in Germany, then we have a participation of adults, women and men, on a 50-50%, as a lot of the men get their options and possibilities and opportunities for their continuing learning within their factories or within the trade unions or the farmer assistance boards. If we look at the centers again and check the age, then you will see that the majority of the participants are in the age range between 35 and 64, more than 2/3. But at the same time, you see that some of them are younger and some of them in a growing range are older, which we call older than 65. And at the same time, you can see that there are about 20% related to politics, society, and the environment, this area which we concentrate today on. So it is a large share of 1.5 million participating in these areas. Now let us place the German example for the time into some international historical context. We had the founding of Unesco in 1949. We had the huge Confintea 3 UNESCO World Conference in Tokyo in 1972. The first UNESCO report on the future of education was also in 1972. In 1972 was the most important first report on the limits to growth. The discussion on natural resources, on climate change started by then. And of course, the related education for sustainable development. Close to 1972, at Confintea 3, was the founding of the International Council for Adult Education, which is the civil society movement in the field of adult education. And in 1976, we had the first UNESCO recommendations on adult education. If you look at the reports, we have the highly well-known Faure report in 1972, Learning to Be. We had 1995, Delors, Learning the Treasure Within. And we had in 21, the report Learning to Become by Sever, who is chairing it, the president from Ethiopia, on the futures of education. And to this report, it was that the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning contributed, as well as adult learning and education, because the future cannot wait, the International Council for Adult Education. And let me quote from this important document from the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, because it is supporting us so much in our work with our communities. The report reads, renew community spaces for learning opportunities, encourage and support local lifelong learning initiatives, renewing community spaces for learning opportunities. Many existing public spaces, especially public libraries, museums, community centers, and religious venues, are already entry points for continued education. And I'm quoting this as I feel it is supporting your work in Korea, it is supporting our work in Germany, and globally, that we are doing the community education and learning in a continued way, even in these times of digitalization. Confintea 6 in 2009 stressed again that adult education represents a significant component of the lifelong learning process, combining formal to non-formal and to informal learning. And Confintea 6 said that creating multi-purpose community learning spaces and centers is of highest importance. The World Education Forum in Incheon in 2015 went into this area as well. And they came up with this overall goal: ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And as one of the targets, it was calling by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development through education for human rights, gender equality, and global citizenship. And as a means of implementation, Education 2030 from Incheon called "Make learning spaces and environments for non-formal and adult learning and education widely available, including networks of community learning centers and spaces, and provision for access to IT resources as essential elements of lifelong learning." And I think our meeting of today in Osan is especially that we have to get together as networking community learning centers and spaces, just like we have the National Association of the DVV in Germany. All of this was taken into Goal 4 on quality education into the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is, of course, an interesting debate which is calling that all the other, altogether 17 goals, can really only be implemented if we have the best quality education for everybody throughout life, because only then we can engage properly in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. All of this was then put into a revision of the 1976 document on the recommendation of adult learning and education, RAIL, in 2015, and adopted by the UNESCO General Conference. So by adopting through the general conferences, it has a note that we all, with our governments and with our people, that we are supporting and implementing this recommendation. And this recommendation, again, creating or strengthening appropriate institutions like community centers for delivering adult learning and education, and encouraging adults to use these as hubs for individual learning as well as community development. We are now approaching Confintea 7. And the wording reads adult learning and education in the 2030 agenda. And as I mentioned before, we all came to Suwon and Ulsan in 2017 for the midterm review. In the meantime, we have the country reports. We had all the sub-regional meetings and regional conference this year, and next year we shall all meet for Confintea 7 in Morocco, and it will be important that our field of work of community learning centers and education for sustainable development, as well as global citizenship education, feature high up. The Confintea 7 will be used to publicize the 5th global report on adult learning and education, which will be on active citizenship and education. Now let us move closer into how DVV and DVV International is implementing through the local folk high schools this area of what we in 1977 as a project called development education, but which is now, ever since 2002, as global learning as a program, as an approach, is deeply or more deeply rooted in the local centers and in DVV. However, the training and retraining of full-time and part-time staff, the production and dissemination of teaching and learning materials, the counseling of colleagues working in the VHS on recent innovations, and the networking with other associations, institutions, and organizing was a key feature. And this is strongly repeated now, that in a handout conceptualizing digital events, it is an approach how to make use of digital sources in our work of global learning. It is all under the slogan, think globally, act locally. And I think this triangle of knowledge, skills, and the political will, the deep intention, is so important if we want to implement that area. And here I want to go deeper into a handout which has been published recently by DVV International and DVV through their federal working group on politics, society, and environment. And this is related to education for sustainable development at VHS. And what is so important is that they have developed the whole institution approach. And the whole institution approach means that everybody in the organization and every aspect of the organization, so the organizational development and all areas of the program, have to be scrutinized and developed in this area of sustainable development. And education for sustainable development has to inform all aspects of the structure and organization and the program. Therefore, they developed a checklist on the sustainable development goals. The checklist asked, where are we now in the implementation with the SDG in our folk high school? We are now in the year of 2021. The SDG were agreed to in 2015. So we have done 6 years and there are only 9 years more. So where are we now? So that we have this as a starting point for the next steps. We have to be clear on the relevance of the SDG for us inside the organization and for the relevance for all of us in the events which we are doing. And therefore, it will be important to get an understanding what are we already doing and what we have to do in the future. And the scaling of the achievements of those 20 areas of the checklist, from 1 to 5, from now to later, I think will help all people working in the VHS to understand where we are now and where we are moving to. So at the same time, there is a profile of the list for planning and evaluation of the future work. We have to be clear of sharp titles of our presentations. What are the themes so that people really understand how they are related to education for sustainable development or citizenship education, to the SDGs of the folk high school. What is the event form? What is the target group? And what are the networking partners? Because we are quite sure we cannot do it alone, but we have to work with partners from the networks which are close to education for sustainable development, as well as to global citizenship education. And only this can help us in our learning for the future. There are a huge number of practical examples from individual VHS in that handout. From the north in Hamburg, where they had a course on gender means diversity. Even further to the north in Rügen, there was a seminar on climate change. In Dortmund, they looked into ecological cooking. In Bochum, into global learning as a second chance. And in Frankfurt, they had a planning workshop for citizens in getting a better understanding in which way their city should develop. And in Gelsenkirchen, they had a seminar discussing poverty, which so often has a female face in our society. These practical examples are of high relevance to get a better understanding. And it may be, as an example, that I want to suggest that if there is an opportunity that the community education organization takes it as an option to have this handout on educational for sustainable development for local community centers, to get it translated for a deeper sharing for all those who are involved in the practice of community work in Korea. Working with agencies and partners, I mentioned that. We have a specialized federal agency for civic education, and there is a relationship that the president of this agency is a member of the DVV advisory board. We have the German Commission of Unesco, who has a specialized project on education for sustainable development, and the director of DVV International is on their education sector group. We have the Friends of the Earth in Germany, the BUND, and we have the Naturschutzbund, NABU, and they are all involved on local, regional, and national level in action and learning. And it's a great opportunity for the local centers, the VHS, as well as for DVV International and DVV to cooperate with them and get their knowledge into our work. You follow a few more examples where colleagues in the community work in Korea may want to look at. There is a publication on communities learning. There is a publication on community learning centers. There is another one, adult education centers as the key to development, and the contribution of adult education to active participatory citizenship. All of these you can see, they are on the DVV International website, and you can download all of them free of charge. There is a toolbox on adult learning and education by DVV International, which you may want to look also on a curriculum globale, a curriculum for training adult educators worldwide. There's a curriculum institutionale on the organizational development in AIL institutions. There's a curriculum interculturale training course for instructors who work with refugees and migrants. There's a very interesting new toolkit on adult learning and education as a system building approach. There is another one on gender in AIL, and a training course on building educational bridges. Again, you can access these all through the DVV International website, download, translate, and use or disseminate further. Now I want to mention a specific publication which we just did, and where we were fortunate to have the support from Professor Choi Eun-chil and Dr. Sung Lee, who helped us with a Korean case study. Altogether, there are 14, and that is especially on public financing, on popular, on community, on civic adult learning and education. A lot to learn from those 14 case studies across the world. I'm coming to the end. We had the 2021 UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, ESD for 2030. It concluded with a Berlin Declaration. And at the bottom, you can see their website, so you can get the details. And it is my deep wish that we have a chance to meet again for the 5th UNESCO Forum on Transformative Education for Sustainable Development, Global Citizenship, Health, and well-being, which will be next month already. And it is organized through the Asia Pacific Center for Education and International Understanding, which is based in Seoul, in your country, in Korea. And it would be marvelous if we could meet there and deepen our discourse on the importance of community education and learning globally, for you in Korea, for us in Germany. Gamsahamnida, thank you so much. Herzlichen Dank. It was a pleasure to join you for this moment, and I will be happy to look more on the Osan Forum, how it moves along. Thank you and goodbye.